Well, welcome to this session of the Church History Symposium. This session is called Exploring Religious Rights and Responsibilities in the U.S. Legal System. My name is Brian Passantino. I'm a research consultant at the Church History Library, and I'm really excited to be moderating this session. We have a great slate of presenters today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce all three of them, and in the order that they will be presenting, and then we will go from there. Our next presenter is Michael T. Warley. Michael Warley is an attorney, and from 2019 to 2020, he served as a member of the inaugural class of law clerks for Judge Howard C. Nielsen, Jr. of the District of Utah. Before that, Michael worked for a D.C.-based Supreme Court boutique, litigating disputes regarding the First Amendment, Title VII, and other issues. A graduate of Brigham Young University's law school, Michael also spent time working for the school's International Center for Law and Religion Studies and interning in the chamber of Justice Christine M. Durham of the Utah Supreme Court.
Good morning. I'm honored to be here today and appear alongside Professor Sauce and Professor Duncan, or if they'll forgive me, Brett and Bill today. They have both been cherished mentors for me for quite a long time, and I'm grateful for what I've learned from both of them and the opportunities they have provided me. Each of us has chosen to look through this topic of religious liberty in the United States through a different lens. As you just heard, Brett talked about how individuals went from being persecuted to being included. Bill, of course, will explain next what his topic is. My framing stems from the structure of the United States Constitution. As most, if not all of you are aware, the Constitution structure is three branches of government: legislative, executive, and the judiciary. Why, you might ask, does this structure provide a lens for examining latter-day history regarding religious freedom? I answer, Latter-day Saint history is replete with statements by church leaders regarding the importance of this constitutional structure. Reverend conference talks over speeches or places you might not expect, such as dedicatory prayers for our sacred temples. Now, I don't pretend this to be a comprehensive presentation of all relevant quotes on this topic. Rather, since I do have a captive audience today, most of the quotes I've selected are linked to stories I find intriguing, so you're going to have to put up with a few stories as well. Well, Nathan Norman yesterday gave a much more complete presentation on this topic. I also have a word or two to say about respect for the rule of law. Be that statutes passed by legislators, judicial opinions, or executive action. Before I begin, 4 housekeeping items. Bear with me, we'll get to the meat. First, I'd like to thank my wife who suggested the reading that prompted this entire talk. So she's helping with our kids today and not in person, but I wanted to note her for the source of the talk. Second, I'm aware of my cerebral palsy and that our time together is valuable, so if it all works out, as we move through the slides, some of the quotes I selected will be read to you, and I'd like to thank both a friend of mine for reading some of them, and my father, who's here today, for editing some others. Last thing, I want to note that I am speaking in my own personal capacity, and I am not speaking on behalf of any entity. There you go. All right, now, if there's a thesis statement here, it is this. Latter-day Saint leaders view the structure of the U.S. government as a protection for religious freedom, independent of the rights secured by the First Amendment. Let's begin with a very subtle reference to the Constitution structure. This is found in the revelation given to Joseph Smith that at least hints at this importance. For Latter-day Saints, we read this passage is Jesus Christ himself speaking directly. I'll go ahead and read this one. It is not right that any man should be in bondage one to another. And for this purpose have I, this is Jesus Christ talking, established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I raised up unto this very purpose, and redeemed the land by the shedding of blood. Now this isn't original to me. Indeed, Brother Ahmad Corbett of the Churches of Men's General Presidency spoke in much greater detail on this topic earlier this year. Please note how this revelatory passage links a crucial civil right, the freedom from slavery, to the structure of the Constitution. This was not a reference to the 13th Amendment banning slavery, because that amendment didn't come till 20 or more years after the Revelation. At the time the passage was written, slavery was still legal in the southern states. In my view, this revelation viewed the Constitution structure as a catalyst for the later development of civil rights. We can see more traces of a respect for separation of powers as we move to the second half of the 19th century. Now, I'm not a historian, and I haven't studied the history of polygamy as intently as Professor South or the other presenters at this conference who are experts on the topic. But relevant to this respect for rule of law, respect for judicial experience is a journey that involves two Supreme Court cases. In Reynolds v. United States, a major Supreme Court decision that others have and will discuss in more detail, the Supreme Court held that there was no constitutional right to practice polygamy for religious reasons. After this decision, President John Taylor, then president of the church, gave a more defiant attitude. It now becomes a question whether we should obey God or man. Again, I don't mean to be a super historian on this point, but the Taylor presidency was dominated by persecution and defiance, efforts to somehow find a solution that would eventually allow polygamy to continue to be practiced, even if it meant defying the law, which many Latter-day Saints did. A subsequent decision in 1890 that Brett mentioned, the late co-president of the presiding bishop, the late co-president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That case, in 1890, disincorporated the church, but this time the response was different. Let's see if this audio works. It does not. Okay, that's fine. As you can see on screen, inasmuch as laws have been enacted by Congress forbidding plural marriages, President Woodruff declared his intent to submit to those laws. And really, when it's come down to it, statements like this are compliant with what facilitated Utah statehood and the start of that transition from persecution to inclusion that Brett talked about. Leaving polygamy behind, And returning to my earlier theme, the next reference comes at the Salt Lake Temple dedication. I'm sorry the recording's not working correctly, but at this temple dedication we see the O God of Israel, that patriots laid the foundation of this great American government. They framed a good constitution and laws which guarantee equal rights and privilege to worship God. And now this is the key part, that the officers, both judicial and executive, confer abundant favors upon the President, his cabinet, and Congress. So, imagine this, for 40 years, it took 40 years to build this temple, and one of the things President Woodruff chose to mention after all that struggle was his gratitude for not just the rights that the Constitution provides, but the structure itself. I'm running short on time, but I'd like to note that other dedicatory prayers such as the one in Logan and had mentioned the Constitution before. I chose this one because it highlighted the structural nature of the Constitution. Well, that's annoying. I can't forward the next slide. But also was just, there we go. Now this is meant to talk about George Albert Smith, and here you're getting a bit of a story. As Mary Jane Woodruff has vividly written, soon after being called as an apostle, Elder George Albert Smith not only suffered from depression, but suffered a debilitating illness that would today be diagnosed as lupus or something lupus, which he was diagnosed with later in life, or was classified as a disease which is still less understood, such as chronic fatigue syndrome. By 1909, even attending one session at General Conference left him, quote, too fatigued for the rest of the meetings, end quote. Subsequently, he was basically unable to function for years, being on bed rest at times, taking 6 months respite to both California and St. George, and doing very little in terms of church service compared to any calling you can name. All of this brings us to his first volume talk in 2.5 years, and what he said at that talk. After making an appearance and speaking briefly in April 1911, at that conference he gave this forward proper sermon in 1911. IT, can you click on that audio button? Oh. Yeah. Oh. Down. There's an audio right there. It's right there. Okay. The point is, and I'll try. Did that do anything? Okay. Well, I tried to be concise. The point is, and I'm not going to read this all for the sake of time, but he said, let us stand by the lawmakers and encourage them in the making of just laws, and stand by the executive departments and the judiciary in the administration of those laws, and so forth. So, again, there's a lot one could speak about after 2 years of chronic illness, but for some reason, he returned to this. We're starting to be a theme of respect for the Constitution structure itself. He was not a lawyer, he wasn't, as far as I know, classically trained the way, say, Elder Holland or Elder Garner today, but he found this important enough to speak on. Let's go forward to 1972, and in some respects, my hometown of Provo, where we got the Provo Temple dedication. President Joseph Fielding Smith dedicated the temple, and the president of the Quorum of the 12 at that time, President Harold Brady, read this prayer. And again, as in Salt Lake, wrote down both the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of our government, that each may function widely and courageously in its respective field. Again, this is another sacred, significant occasion, and time is being taken to be grateful for our Constitution structure. Now we got another story. I selected the Provo Fair in particular, not just because of that the quote illustrates my thesis, but because of its proximity in time to a significant separation of powers event, and because Latter Day Saints had a role in that. The Watergate scandal pitted the executive against the legislative. In the years after the Provo Temple dedication, Judge John Sprecher hired two eldest law clerks, Dieter Christopherson and Lynn Wardle. Elder Christopherson's service was when the Watergate tapes were released. He was one of the first to hear those tapes. And Mr. Wardo served as a law clerk afterwards during the trial of some of the conspirators of that scandal. And of course, most of us know that Elder Christopherson went on to become an apostle, and of course, some of you know that Lynn Wardo went on to be Professor Wardo. Bill and I both worked for him at BYU, and Brett was a colleague. Anyway, just a story I thought was relevant given the Latter Day Saint influence and the proximity to that Provo temple dedication. Later on in the 1970s, and this is where we really, I'm going to have to skip over this for time, but in 1976, then Elder Edward Taft Benson spoke at length about checks and balances, and he went into some detail about what those balances were and their significance. Again, this was a general conference talk, so a very prominent freshman usually was on point here, reference to the veto, the Supreme Court's power on nullifying laws, and so forth. And that's basically all I have as kind of a footnote to this. I want to talk briefly about something for Daniel Darwin at church start in 2014 that I think ties well with the quote from President Woodruff I said earlier. In this conference talk, President Oaks talked about various issues that were Latter-day Saints today disagree with larger society on. After explaining the church's stance on several moral issues, he said, when our positions do not prevail, we should accept unfavorable results graciously and practice civility with our adversaries. In any event, we should be pushing the goodwill towards all, rejecting persecution of any kind, including persecution based on race, ethnicity, religious belief, or non-belief, and differences in sexual orientation. Time does not permit me to really delve into the significance to me of this quote, but suffice it to say the timing of this quote allowed for it was significant in the larger context of the church's position on same-sex marriage. I'm out of time. Thank you.